The homeless boy found refuge in an abandoned aquarium. Then he realized he wasn't alone behind the glass. Tell us in the comments which city you're listening from. Click the like button and let's begin the story. Lucas was 9 years old when the social worker knocked on the door of the small apartment in Tacoma where he had lived with his grandmother for as long as he could remember. The woman wore a gray suit and carried a clipboard that seemed too heavy for someone so thin. Her eyes were tired, the kind of tired that comes from seeing too many broken families and not enough solutions. "Lucas," she said in a voice that tried to sound gentle but came out flat. "I need you to pack your things. Just the essentials. We're leaving in 10 minutes. His grandmother had died during the night. Heart failure, they said. She had been 78 years old, a retired seamstress who had taken Lucas in after his mother disappeared when he was 3. No one knew who his father was. No birth certificate had ever been properly filed. In the eyes of the system, Lucas barely existed. The Pierce County Children's Shelter was a 3-story brick building on the industrial outskirts of Tacoma, surrounded by chain-link fences and security cameras that never seemed to work. 80 children crammed into a facility designed for 40. Bunk beds stacked 3 high. Meals that consisted of watery soup, stale bread, and occasionally a piece of overcooked chicken. Lucas learned the rules quickly. Don't ask questions about the children who disappear. Don't complain about the cold showers or the broken heaters. Don't talk to the new adults who visit late at night, walking through the dormitories with the director, Mr. Caldwell, pointing out specific children like merchandise at an auction. Mr. Caldwell was a heavy-set man in his 50s with thinning hair and small eyes that constantly calculated profit. He ran the shelter like a business, pocketing government subsidies while spending as little as possible on the children's actual care. Lucas had been at the shelter for 2 months when he overheard a conversation that changed everything. It was past midnight. He had gotten up to use the bathroom when he heard voices coming from Mr. Caldwell's office. "The boy Lucas is perfect," Caldwell said. 9 years old. No family asking questions. No proper documentation. Completely invisible to the system. "And he's healthy?" asked an unfamiliar male voice. "Saw the doctor last week. Clean bill of health. Strong for his age. Good. The client wants delivery by Friday. The usual fee. Double, actually. This one's in high demand." Lucas pressed himself against the wall, barely breathing. "What about the paperwork?" the stranger asked. "Already prepared. Foster placement to a family in Montana. Completely legitimate on paper. Once he's across state lines, he's your problem." Lucas didn't wait to hear more. He returned to his bunk, his heart pounding so hard he thought it would wake the other children. He knew what happened to kids who got transferred to mysterious families in distant states. Some of the older children whispered stories late at night. Stories about farms where children worked 18-hour days. About houses where things happened that no one wanted to say out loud. He had 3 days until Friday. 3 days to disappear. Lucas spent the next 2 days carefully observing everything. The guard rotations. The broken lock on the kitchen window. The delivery schedule for the food truck that arrived every Wednesday at dawn. He packed nothing except what fit in his pockets. A photograph of his grandmother. $17 he had saved from doing chores. A pocket knife she had given him on his 8th birthday. On Wednesday morning, at 4:47 a.m., while the night guard was asleep in the staff room and the children were still in bed, Lucas slipped through the kitchen window and dropped into the alley behind the shelter. The October air was cold enough to see his breath. He ran. The industrial district of Tacoma spread out before him like a graveyard of abandoned dreams. Empty warehouses with broken windows. Rusted train tracks that hadn't carried freight in decades. Graffiti-covered walls that marked territory for gangs Lucas knew to avoid. He followed the old railway line toward the waterfront, staying in the shadows, moving fast. By the time the sun rose, he was 3 miles from the shelter, cold and hungry, but free. That freedom lasted exactly 4 hours. At a gas station where he tried to buy food with his $17, Lucas saw a white van pull into the parking lot. He recognized the logo on the side immediately. Pierce County Social Services. Through the window, he saw Mr. Caldwell himself in the passenger seat, scanning the area with binoculars. Lucas dropped the candy bar he'd been holding and ran out the back exit. He heard shouting behind him, footsteps, the screech of tires. He ran through alleys, climbed over fences, ducked through gaps in chain-link barriers. His lungs burned. His legs felt like they would give out. But he kept running. The industrial waterfront area opened up before him. Massive concrete structures. Abandoned loading docks. Buildings so old and forgotten that even the homeless avoided them. That's when he saw it. Hidden behind decades of overgrown blackberry bushes and surrounded by a rusted fence, there was a structure that didn't quite fit with the warehouses around it. It was curved, made of weathered concrete and glass, partially collapsed, but still standing. A faded sign, barely readable through the vines, read, Pacific Marine Discovery Center, Estate 1972. An abandoned aquarium. Lucas heard the van's engine growing louder, searching the streets systematically. He didn't have time to think. He squeezed through a gap in the fence, pushed through the thorny bushes that scratched his arms and face, and found a broken window large enough to climb through. The moment he dropped inside, the world changed. The interior was dark, vast, and filled with the smell of damp concrete and something else. Something organic and old. The ceiling was partially collapsed, letting in scattered beams of afternoon light that illuminated floating dust particles and revealed the true scale of the place. He was standing in what had once been the main exhibition hall. Massive cylindrical glass tanks rose from floor to ceiling, some cracked, some still intact. Most were empty, but several still held water. Dark, murky water that hadn't been changed in decades. The floor was covered with debris. Broken tiles, shattered glass, rotted wooden benches where families had once sat to watch dolphins and seals perform. But it was the silence that struck Lucas most. A heavy, pressing silence broken only by the steady drip of water somewhere in the darkness. He moved cautiously through the main hall, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Educational posters from the 1970s still clung to the walls, their colors faded to ghosts. Images of smiling families watching orcas. Children pressing their hands against glass while sea turtles swam past. The place had been beautiful once. Now it felt like a tomb. Lucas found a staircase leading down, marked with a sign that read staff-only lower levels. He hesitated. Every instinct told him not to go deeper into this place. But he could still hear vehicles outside, men shouting to each other as they searched the waterfront. He descended into the darkness. The lower level was a maze of corridors with pipes running along the ceiling and metal doors marked with technical labels. Filtration Room 3. Medical quarantine. Deep observation tanks. Some doors were locked. Others hung open, revealing rooms filled with rusted equipment and filing cabinets tipped over, their contents spilled across the floor. Lucas found a small room that might have been a staff break area. There was a metal desk, a chair with torn upholstery, and most importantly, a door that still locked from the inside. He closed himself in and finally allowed himself to breathe. For the first time in hours, he was still. That's when he heard it. A sound coming from somewhere deeper in the building. Not the drip of water. Not the creak of old metal. Something else. A splash. Like something large moving through water. Lucas froze, listening. Silence. Then another splash. Closer this time. He told himself it was just old pipes. Water drainage. The building settling. But deep down he knew. He wasn't alone in the abandoned aquarium. Lucas sat motionless in the small room, barely breathing, listening to the sounds echoing through the lower levels. Splash. Silence. Splash. The rhythm was too irregular to be mechanical, too deliberate to be random water drainage. Something was moving in the tanks. He waited until the sound stopped completely, then carefully unlocked the door and stepped back into the corridor. The darkness was nearly total now. The few skylights that penetrated to this depth provided only the faintest illumination. His eyes adjusted slowly. The corridor extended in both directions, lined with metal doors. He chose left, moving silently, his hand trailing along the damp concrete wall for guidance. The first room he entered was labeled Specimen Storage. Inside were floor-to-ceiling shelves holding glass jars of various sizes. Most were empty or broken, but several still contained things floating in cloudy preservative fluid. Fish specimens, tissue samples, things he couldn't identify and didn't want to look at too closely. The second room was larger. Feeding preparation area. There were industrial sinks, a walk-in freezer that no longer worked, and metal tables scarred with decades of use. On one wall hung a chart showing feeding schedules for various species. The last date marked was October 15, 1979. 43 years ago. Lucas found a storage closet with shelves of supplies. Most had deteriorated, but he discovered several items that made his heart leap. A working flashlight with weak but functional batteries. 3 sealed bottles of water that looked relatively recent. A wool blanket covered in dust but still intact. And most surprising of all, a modern energy bar with an expiration date from 6 months ago. Someone had been here recently. The realization sent ice through his veins. He took the flashlight, water, and blanket and continued exploring with new caution. The corridor eventually opened into a massive chamber that made Lucas stop and stare. It was a cylindrical room at least 40 feet across and 3 stories deep. The walls were lined with observation windows, and in the center was an enormous tank that extended both above and below the walkway where he stood. This had been the deep dive exhibition tank, the one where visitors could watch from multiple levels as divers swam with large marine animals. The tank was still filled with water, dark, green-black water that looked thick as oil. Lucas approached one of the observation windows and shined his flashlight through the murky glass. For a moment, he saw nothing but swirling sediment. Then something massive moved past the window. Just a shadow. A displacement of water. But definitely something large. Lucas stumbled backward, his flashlight beam shaking. It was impossible. There couldn't be anything alive in there. Not after 43 years of neglect. Not without food or fresh water or oxygen circulation. But he had seen something. He forced himself to breathe slowly and think rationally. It was probably just debris, a piece of equipment that had fallen into the tank decades ago, shifting with water currents. That's when he noticed the stairs leading down to a lower observation level. Against every survival instinct, he descended. The lower level provided floor-to-ceiling windows into the tank. The glass was thick, designed to withstand massive water pressure. Some panels were cracked. One had a spiderweb of fractures radiating from a central impact point. Lucas pressed his face close to the clearest section of glass and aimed his flashlight into the depths. The beam penetrated perhaps 6 feet before the murky water absorbed all light. But in that 6 feet, he saw something that didn't belong. A chain, thick and corroded, hanging down into the darkness. And attached to it, barely visible, was what looked like a metal platform or cage. He was trying to understand what he was seeing when movement in his peripheral vision made him turn. There was a door he hadn't noticed before. Unlike the others, this one was made of reinforced steel and had multiple locks. A sign bolted to the metal read, "Authorized personnel, only Deep Habitat Project, Dr. Robert Henning, Director." Below that, someone had spray-painted in red, "Do not open." Lucas should have walked away. He should have returned to the small staff room, locked himself in, and waited until morning to leave. But the energy bar with the recent expiration date kept nagging at him. Someone had been here in the last 6 months. Someone who knew about this place. He tried the door handle. Locked. But when he examined the lock more closely with his flashlight, he saw that it had been forced open before. Recently, the metal around the bolt was scratched and bent. He pushed hard on the door. It held for a moment. Then the damaged lock gave way with a metallic screech that echoed through the chamber. Behind the door was a staircase descending into complete darkness. Lucas hesitated at the threshold. The air rising from below was different, colder. It carried a smell that made something primal in his brain scream danger. He aimed his flashlight down the stairs. The beam revealed concrete steps disappearing into blackness. And on the third step, something that made his blood freeze. A footprint. Fresh. Wet. As if someone had walked up from below within the last few hours. But it wasn't a normal footprint. It was wrong. Too wide. The impression too deep. Lucas stood at the top of the stairs, staring at the wet footprint, his mind struggling to make sense of it. A human foot didn't make a mark like that. He swept the flashlight beam down the staircase. More prints appeared in the dust and moisture. They led down into the darkness, each one separated by a stride that was too long, too irregular. Every rational part of him said to leave, but he thought about the white van outside, about Mr. Caldwell selling children to strangers, about having nowhere else to go. The abandoned aquarium was his only refuge. He needed to know what was down there. Lucas descended the stairs slowly, counting each step. 15 steps down, the temperature dropped noticeably. 20 steps, and he could hear water moving. Not the gentle lap of contained water, but something that sounded like current. Flow. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a corridor carved through raw rock. This level wasn't part of the original aquarium structure. This was something older. Natural caves that had been expanded and reinforced with concrete and steel supports. The walls glistened with moisture. His flashlight revealed a series of rooms branching off the main tunnel. The first was filled with equipment. Old diving suits hanging on racks. Oxygen tanks covered in rust. Underwater cameras in waterproof cases, their lenses clouded with age. The second room made him stop breathing. It was set up like a laboratory. Stainless steel tables. Microscopes covered with plastic sheets. And along one wall, a massive filing cabinet with dozens of drawers. On the main table sat a journal, leather-bound and swollen with moisture damage. Lucas opened it carefully. The first page read, Deep Habitat Project Principal Investigator, Dr. Robert Henning Classification. Restricted October 1978. No end date. The entries were written in precise, scientific handwriting that gradually became more erratic as the pages progressed. October 18, 1978 initial specimens acquired from Pacific Deep Sea Survey. 3 juvenile Architeuthis ducks giant squid, and 2 unidentified cephalopod species showing remarkable adaptive capabilities. Containment tanks prepared in lower habitat chambers. November 3, 1978 specimens displaying unexpected intelligence. Subject A has learned to manipulate feeding mechanism within 72 hours. Neurological capacity far exceeds published data. Recommending expansion of study parameters. December 12, 1978 disturbing development. Subject C has damaged containment barrier. Required emergency repairs. Animals are communicating through bioluminescent patterns. This was not anticipated. January 30th, 1979 federal observers arrived today. Asked too many questions about funding sources and specimen origins. I explained this is pure research. They seemed unconvinced. Must accelerate timeline. Lucas flipped forward, his hand shaking. March 15, 1979 lost contact with Subject A for 6 hours. Found it had accessed maintenance tunnels through deteriorated concrete section. It was in the public exhibition tank. We discovered it after closing, thank God. No visitors saw. The containment situation is becoming untenable. May 8, 1979 Jenkins is dead. He entered the deep tank for routine maintenance. Subject be attacked without warning. By the time we pulled him out, it was too late. The university wants to shut us down. The board is asking questions. But they don't understand what we have here. These creatures are evolving, adapting, learning. If we terminate the project now, we lose everything. June 20th, 1979 made the decision. We're sealing the lower levels. The university thinks we've transferred the specimens to NOAA facilities in Oregon. Instead, we've moved them to the deepest chambers where the ocean water still flows through the original cave system. They can survive there indefinitely. The tidal exchange provides fresh water and food sources. I've left detailed notes in case anyone continues the research. The specimens must not be destroyed. They represent a breakthrough in our understanding of cephalopod intelligence. July 4, 1979 final entry. The aquarium is closing to the public. Official reason: structural concerns and budget cuts. Real reason: we can't risk exposure of what's living in the sublevels. I'm leaving Seattle. The university has made it clear I'm no longer welcome. But I'm leaving them behind. My life's work: growing, learning, waiting. Perhaps one day someone will understand what I've accomplished here. R. Henning. The final pages were water-damaged and illegible. Lucas closed the journal, his mind reeling. Giant squid, intelligent cephalopods, left to survive in underground chambers connected to the ocean. 43 years ago. No, it was impossible. They couldn't still be alive. That's when he heard it again. The splash. Louder now. Much closer. It was coming from deeper in the cave system. Lucas turned slowly, shining his light down the main tunnel. The wet footprints led in that direction. But now he understood. They weren't footprints. They were tentacle marks. The suction cups would create that kind of impression. The irregular spacing. The depth. Something had crawled out of the water recently. Something that left wet marks as it moved through the lower levels. Lucas backed toward the stairs, his light sweeping the tunnel entrance. The sound of moving water grew louder. Then he saw it. At the very edge of his flashlight beam, where the tunnel curved into darkness, something glistened. Something massive and dark and covered with what looked like hundreds of circular patterns. An arm. No, a tentacle. Easily 8 feet long and as thick as a man's leg, sliding along the floor of the tunnel with organic, muscular fluidity. Lucas ran. He hit the stairs at full speed, his flashlight beam jerking wildly. Behind him, he heard something large dragging itself along the corridor. Not fast, but deliberate, purposeful. He reached the upper level and slammed the steel door shut, throwing his weight against it. Through the gap, he heard water sloshing, the wet sound of something massive pulling itself forward. Then silence. Lucas stood with his back pressed against the door, gasping for breath, his heart hammering. Minutes passed. Nothing. He finally stepped away from the door and realized he was shaking uncontrollably. He returned to the small staff room, locked himself in, and wrapped himself in the musty blanket he'd found. The abandoned aquarium was not abandoned. Dr. Henning's specimens had survived, growing in the darkness, learning, waiting. And now Lucas was trapped here with them. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He sat in the small staff room with the blanket wrapped around his shoulders, listening to every sound in the building. The drip of water, the groan of old metal, the occasional splash from the deep tanks. Every noise made him flinch. As dawn light began filtering through the broken skylights above, he allowed himself to think clearly for the first time since fleeing down those stairs. He needed food. He needed a better understanding of this place. And most importantly, he needed to know if there was another way out besides the window he'd entered through. The energy bar and bottled water he'd found meant someone else had been here recently. Someone who knew about the creatures. Someone who had survived. Maybe there were supplies. Maybe there was a safe route out. He waited until full daylight, then unlocked the door and stepped into the corridor. The lower level was quiet. He avoided the steel door leading to the caves and instead explored the other rooms systematically. Most contained nothing useful. Broken equipment, moldy paperwork, shattered glass. But in a storage room marked emergency supplies, he found something that gave him hope. A footlocker pushed against the back wall, partially hidden under a collapsed shelf. Inside were items that had clearly been placed there deliberately, not decades ago, but recently. Canned food with expiration dates from this year. Bottles of water. A sleeping bag. A battery-powered radio. Matches. A first aid kit. And at the bottom, a notebook. Lucas opened it with trembling hands. The handwriting was different from Dr. Henning's scientific script. This was hurried, messy, written by someone under stress. The first entry was dated 3 months ago. August 15th found this place while exploring the old waterfront. Thought it was just another abandoned building. Didn't realize what was living here until the third day. Saw one of them through the tank glass. Bigger than anything I've ever seen. Had to be 20 feet long. I should leave. But I have nowhere else to go. At least here, I know what the danger is. August 22nd figured out their patterns. They're nocturnal mostly. Stay in the deep water during the day. At night, 1 or 2 will hunt through the upper tanks, and sometimes come into the corridors. As long as I stay in the sealed rooms after dark, I'm safe. I think. September 3rd, running low on food. Went outside to steal from the dumpsters behind the restaurants on Dock Street. Almost got caught by cops. Saw a missing person poster with my face on it. Mom's still looking. I can't go back. Not after what happened with Dad. September 18th, the creatures are intelligent. I'm sure of it now. One of them has been watching me through the observation glass. Same one every time. It has a distinctive pattern of scars on its mantle. When I move, it tracks me. When I tap the glass, it taps back. Not randomly. It copies my rhythm exactly. October 2nd, something's wrong. The scarred one hasn't appeared in 3 days. The water in the main tank is disturbed. Like they're agitated. I heard sounds last night that I've never heard before. Not splashing. Something else. Like clicking. Communication. October 9th, they know someone else is here. Last night, I heard movement in the corridors. Wet sliding sounds. They were searching. I stayed absolutely silent in my hiding spot. After an hour, they went back to the water. But they know. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks ago. October 19th, I'm leaving tonight. Going to risk the streets. Anything is better than this. The scarred one is dying. I can see it through the glass. Its color is wrong. Its movements are slow. But the others are bringing it food. Keeping it near the surface where there's more oxygen. They're trying to save it. I watched one of them stroke its companion with its tentacles. Gentle. Caring. These things feel. They bond. They grieve. I don't know what Dr. Henning created down here, but it's not just animals. Tomorrow I'm gone. If you're reading this, whoever you are, be careful at night. Stay in the sealed rooms. And whatever you do, don't go into the water. The notebook entry ended there. Lucas sat back, processing what he'd read. Someone else had lived here. A runaway kid like him. Someone hiding from something worse than giant squid. But that person had left 2 weeks ago. The supplies in the footlocker were meant for them, but they'd abandoned them when they fled. Lucas now had food, water, and shelter. He could survive here for weeks if necessary. But the question was, should he? He thought about the social workers searching for him. About Mr. Caldwell and the man who bought children. About the van with tinted windows. At least here, he knew what the danger was. He decided to stay, but he needed to establish rules. Boundaries. Stay in the sealed rooms at night. Never go near the water. Avoid the steel door to the caves. Survive until he could figure out a real plan. For 3 days, the system worked. Lucas established a routine. During daylight hours, he explored the upper levels, always keeping the emergency exits in sight. He found a storage room with old aquarium merchandise, shirts, plush toys, guidebooks from 1979. He used the shirts as extra layers against the cold. He rationed the food carefully. 1 can per day. Small sips of water. At night, he locked himself in the staff room and listened to the sounds of the creatures moving through the building. Splashing in the tanks. The wet drag of tentacles on concrete. Once, a sound like breathing right outside his door, a rhythmic whoosh of air through a siphon. But they never tried to break in. They hunted. They moved. But they left him alone. On the 4th day, everything changed. Lucas was exploring a corridor he hadn't fully investigated when he found a room marked security office. Inside were banks of old monitors, all dark and dead. But beneath them was something that made his pulse quicken. A wall-mounted telephone. It looked ancient, covered in dust, but the line was hardwired into the building. Lucas picked up the receiver, expecting nothing, but he heard a dial tone. The line was still active. His hands shook as he dialed 911. It rang once, twice. 911, what's your emergency? Lucas's voice came out as a whisper. I need help. Speak up, please. I can barely hear you. He started to respond when he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Human footsteps. Hello? Are you there? The operator asked. Lucas carefully set the phone down and moved to the doorway, peering out. Two men were moving through the corridor with flashlights, speaking in low voices. The kid's definitely in here somewhere. Found fresh footprints upstairs. Caldwell's paying $5,000 for this one. Let's make it quick. Lucas's blood turned to ice. They'd found him. He couldn't respond to the 911 operator without giving away his position. He carefully hung up the phone and looked for another exit. There was none. The security office was a dead end. The footsteps were getting closer. Check every room. He's got nowhere to run. Lucas looked around desperately. The only hiding spot was beneath the security desk, but it was an obvious place to check. Then he saw it. An air vent near the ceiling. Large enough for a child, barely. He climbed onto the desk, pried the vent cover loose as quietly as possible, and squeezed inside. The metal duct was cramped and dark. He crawled forward, trying not to make noise, feeling his way through the blackness. Behind him, he heard the men enter the security office. Nothing here. Check under the desk. Already did. Let's keep moving. Lucas crawled further into the ventilation system, taking random turns, moving away from the voices. The duct system extended throughout the building. He could hear the men searching below, their voices echoing up through vents. He kept crawling. After what felt like hours, his hands touched something unexpected. A grate looking down into a dark space. He peered through and saw water. He was directly above one of the large exhibition tanks. The water below was dark and still. Lucas started to back away when he heard voices directly below him. The two men had entered the tank observation room. This is a waste of time, one said. The kid probably drowned in one of these tanks. Caldwell wants proof. We check everything. Lucas held his breath, absolutely still. That's when the water below began to ripple. Something was rising from the depths. A shape, massive and dark, ascending toward the surface. The men didn't see it. They were examining the opposite wall with their flashlights. But Lucas watched as a creature larger than a car emerged from the black water. Its body was covered in patterns that shifted and changed color. Its 8 arms spread wide, each one thick with muscle, and lined with suction cups the size of dinner plates. It broke the surface silently. And Lucas realized it wasn't hunting randomly. It was responding to the presence of the men in its territory. One of the hunters finally turned toward the water. What the hell is? The creature struck with horrifying speed. A tentacle shot out, wrapped around the man's waist, and yanked him into the tank before he could scream. The second man stumbled backward, his flashlight falling and spinning across the floor. Jesus. Mike. The water churned violently, then went still. The remaining man ran for the door. He made it 3 steps before another tentacle shot from the water, wrapped around his ankle, and pulled. He hit the ground hard, his fingernails scraping the concrete as he was dragged backward. Help. Somebody help me. He grabbed onto a metal railing, holding on with desperate strength. The creature pulled harder. Lucas watched, frozen in horror, as the man's grip slowly weakened. He looked up directly at the vent where Lucas was hiding. Their eyes met. The man's face was pure terror. Then his hand slipped. He was pulled into the water with a splash that echoed through the chamber. Silence returned. Lucas stayed absolutely motionless in the air duct, his heart hammering so hard he thought his ribs would break. The water in the tank settled. No bodies floated to the surface. After 5 minutes, Lucas carefully backed away from the grate and continued crawling through the ventilation system. He needed to get out. Now, whatever danger waited outside was better than staying here. But as he crawled, trying to find a duct that led to the upper levels, he heard something that made him freeze. Splashing. Movement. Coming from multiple directions. The creatures were active. All of them. The attack had triggered something. Lucas crawled faster. His hands scraped raw against the metal. He took a left turn, then a right, completely lost in the maze of ducts. Finally, he saw light ahead. A vent opening that led to the main exhibition hall, where he'd first entered the building. He kicked the grate loose and dropped down into the hall, hitting the floor hard. The broken window was across the room, 20 feet away. Freedom. He ran for it. He was 10 feet away when he heard the splash behind him. He didn't look back. He dove through the window, felt broken glass tear his shirt, rolled into the blackberry bushes outside. The thorns ripped his skin, but he kept moving, fighting through the vegetation, crawling through the gap in the fence. He hit the pavement outside and ran. Behind him, something large hit the window he'd just escaped through. The remaining glass shattered outward. Lucas didn't stop running until he was 6 blocks away, gasping for breath in an alley behind a closed warehouse. Only then did he allow himself to look back. The abandoned aquarium sat in the distance, dark and silent. But he knew what lived there now. And he knew those 2 men who'd been hunting him were gone. He leaned against the wall, shaking, trying to process what he'd witnessed. The creatures had killed to protect their territory. But they'd also saved him. If those men had found him first, he'd be on his way to Mr. Caldwell right now. Instead, he was free. Free, alone, and with nowhere to go. Lucas spent that night in an abandoned car behind Industrial Park, shivering despite the layers of stolen aquarium shirts he wore. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw tentacles pulling men into dark water. By morning, he knew he couldn't survive on the streets much longer. Winter was coming. He had no money, no food, and nowhere safe to sleep. He needed to tell someone about the aquarium, about the creatures, about the men who had died. But who would believe him? He thought about the 911 call he'd started. The operator had probably logged it as a prank when he hung up. Unless he had proof. Lucas made a decision that would change everything. He was going back to the aquarium, not to hide, but to document what was there. The previous runaway had left a battery-powered radio in the footlocker. If it worked, it might have a phone function. Or at least he could take photographs with it if it had a camera. He waited until mid-morning, when he knew the creatures would be dormant in the deepest water, and carefully approached the aquarium again. The white van from the shelter was gone. The area was quiet. He climbed back through the same window, his heart pounding. The main exhibition hall was destroyed. The floor was covered with broken glass and water. The tank where the attack had happened was cracked, slowly draining. Lucas moved quickly to the lower level, avoiding looking at the water. He found the footlocker and searched through it. No radio, but something better. A smartphone. Dead battery, but with a charging cable. He searched the security office until he found an outlet that still had power. The building's electrical system was partially functional. He plugged in the phone. It took 15 minutes to charge enough to turn on. When it finally booted up, he found dozens of photos already stored in the gallery. Photos taken by the previous runaway. Images of the creatures. Clear, undeniable proof. A massive cephalopod with arms spanning 15 feet. Close-ups of intelligent, watching eyes. The scarred one, dying, being tended by others. Lucas also found notes in the phone's text app. More observations. Detailed descriptions of behavior. And something else. A video recording. He pressed play. The shaky footage showed one of the creatures in the observation tank. The previous kid was narrating. "It's been watching me for an hour. Look at this." The kid tapped the glass 3 times. The creature tapped back 3 times, exactly matching the rhythm. "Now watch." The kid tapped a complex pattern. Long, short, short, long. The creature paused, as if processing, then tapped back the same pattern. "They're learning," the kid whispered. "They understand." The video ended. Lucas stared at the phone, his mind racing. This was evidence. Real, documented evidence. He could take this to the police. to the news, to someone who could help. But first, he needed to get out of here, safely. He pocketed the phone and headed for the stairs. He was halfway up when he heard a sound that stopped him cold. Not from the water, from above. Voices. Multiple voices. Spread out. Search every level. More men. More hunters. But this time, there were at least 5 of them. Lucas retreated back down the stairs, his options disappearing. He couldn't go up. The men were searching the upper levels. He couldn't go to the main hall. That's where they'd entered. His only option was the one place he'd been avoiding. The steel door to the caves. Lucas stood at the steel door, his hand on the handle, listening to the footsteps above growing closer. Check the lower levels. He's got to be down there. He had no choice. He opened the door and descended into the darkness of the cave system, the phone in his pocket, providing his only light. The air was colder here, wetter. He could hear the ocean now, a distant rhythmic surge that meant these caves connected to Puget Sound. The tunnel opened into the chamber, where he'd found Dr. Henning's journal. He moved past the laboratory and continued deeper, following the wet tentacle marks on the floor. The tunnel sloped downward, the walls changing from concrete reinforcement to raw rock. Water dripped from the ceiling. His footsteps splashed in shallow pools. Then the tunnel opened into something that made Lucas stop in awe. A vast underground chamber, partially natural and partially excavated. The ceiling was lost in darkness above. The floor was mostly water, a massive pool connected to the ocean through a channel carved in the rock. And in the water, illuminated by bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like slow heartbeats, were the creatures. 5 of them, maybe 6. Massive cephalopods moving through the dark water with graceful, alien beauty. Their bodies glowed with patterns of blue and green light that shifted and changed. Communication. Language written in light. Lucas stood frozen at the water's edge, unable to look away. They were magnificent. Terrifying, yes, but magnificent. One of them noticed him. The largest one, with a distinctive pattern of scars across its mantle. The one from the previous runaway's notes. It approached the edge of the pool, its 8 arms moving in slow, controlled waves. Lucas should have run. Instead, he knelt down at the water's edge. The creature stopped 6 feet away, watching him with an eye the size of a dinner plate. An eye that showed unmistakable intelligence. "I'm not going to hurt you," Lucas whispered. The creature's skin rippled with color changes. Blues. Greens. A flash of red. Lucas remembered the video. The tapping. He reached out and tapped his knuckles on the rock. 3 times. The creature extended one arm from the water and tapped the rock with its tip. 3 times. Lucas felt tears in his eyes. It understood. "They're going to find this place," he said quietly. "When those men don't come back, more will come. Eventually, someone will discover you." The creature watched him. Lucas pulled out the phone and showed it the screen, playing the video the previous kid had recorded. The creature's eye focused on the moving images. Its color patterns intensified. It recognized itself. It recognized the other person who had filmed it. "I can help you," Lucas said. "I can show people that you're intelligent, that you shouldn't be killed or captured. But I need you to trust me." He stood up and backed away slowly, moving toward a dry section of the cave. The creature watched but didn't follow. Lucas set up the phone and started recording. For the next 20 minutes, he documented everything. The creatures moving through the water. Their bioluminescent communication. Their coordinated hunting behavior. The way they cared for the scarred one, which was clearly ill. He narrated quietly, explaining what Dr. Henning had done. How these creatures had been left here to survive on their own for over 40 years. How they'd adapted, evolved, become something more than what they'd started as. He was finishing the recording when he heard voices echoing down the tunnel. The hunters had found the steel door. "Down here. I see light." Lucas grabbed the phone and looked at the creatures. The scarred one moved closer to the edge. Their eyes met. Lucas understood. It was offering him a choice. He could try to run back through the tunnels and face the hunters, or he could trust the creatures. He made his decision. Lucas took off his shoes and jacket, sealed the phone in a waterproof bag from Dr. Henning's laboratory, and waded into the water. The cold took his breath away. The scarred creature moved alongside him, its body creating a gentle current. "Take me to the ocean entrance," Lucas whispered. The creature dove. Lucas took a deep breath and followed. The underwater tunnel was completely dark except for the bioluminescent glow of the creatures guiding him. They moved through the water with precision, their tentacles creating subtle currents that pulled him along. His lungs began to burn. Just when he thought he couldn't hold his breath any longer, he saw light above. He broke the surface, gasping. He was in Puget Sound, outside the aquarium, hidden behind the rocks of the waterfront. The creatures surfaced around him, keeping him afloat. Behind him, he could hear shouting from inside the aquarium. The hunters had reached the underground chamber and found it empty. The scarred creature looked at him one last time. Lucas placed his hand on its mantle. "Thank you," he whispered. Then the creatures dove and disappeared into the dark water. Lucas swam to shore, climbed onto the dock, and ran. He didn't stop until he was miles away, in a part of Seattle he didn't recognize. He found a 24-hour coffee shop, went into the bathroom, and locked the door. He pulled out the phone, miraculously still dry in its waterproof case. The videos were intact. The photos were clear. He had proof. Evidence that would change everything. But he also understood something important. If he released this footage, people would hunt the creatures. Scientists, military, corporations. They'd capture them, study them, probably kill them. Unless he was very, very careful about who he trusted. Lucas made a decision. He would tell his story, but only to the right people. People who would protect the creatures instead of exploiting them. He left the bathroom and approached the coffee shop counter. "Excuse me," he said to the barista. "Can I use your phone? I need to call someone." The barista looked at the wet, shivering 9-year-old and her expression softened. "Of course, honey. Are you okay? Do you need help?" Lucas nodded. "I need to talk to a lawyer," he said. "And a marine biologist. And probably the police." "That's a lot of people," the barista said gently. "How about we start with someone who can make sure you're safe?" She pulled out her own phone and dialed. "Hi, yes, I have a child here who needs help. Yes, he's safe. He's with me." 48 hours later, Lucas sat in a conference room at the Seattle Police Department headquarters, surrounded by people who had finally decided to listen. A detective specializing in child trafficking, a representative from Child Protective Services who actually seemed to care, a marine biologist from the University of Washington, and a lawyer from the ACLU who had taken his case pro bono. He told them everything. About Mr. Caldwell selling children from the shelter. About the men who had hunted him. About the abandoned aquarium. And about what lived there. He showed them the videos. The room fell silent as they watched. The detective spoke first. "We need to verify all of this. If what you're saying is true." "It is true," the marine biologist interrupted, her voice shaking. "Those organisms. I've never seen anything like them. The size alone. The apparent intelligence. The immediate priority is the child trafficking operation," the ACLU lawyer said firmly. "Lucas can provide testimony against multiple criminals." "And the creatures?" Lucas asked. The marine biologist looked at him. "They need to be protected. Studied. Yes, but protected. If word gets out about this without proper safeguards, it will be a disaster." "We'll need to involve NOAA," the detective said. "Maybe the Coast Guard. This is bigger than local police." Over the following weeks, Lucas became the center of a case that made national news. The raid on Mr. Caldwell's operation rescued 18 children and led to arrests across 3 states. The trafficking network was dismantled. The abandoned aquarium was secured by federal authorities. Marine biologists began the delicate process of studying the creatures while ensuring their safety. Dr. Henning's research was recovered and published, revealing a decades-old government program that had been quietly forgotten. The creatures were designated as a protected species under an emergency provision. The underground habitat was sealed off from public access, but maintained with proper care. Lucas never told anyone about the moment in the water, about the scarred creature guiding him to safety, about the intelligence he'd seen in that massive eye. Some things were too precious to share. He was placed with a foster family in Olympia, a marine biologist and her husband, a teacher, who had experience with traumatized children. They asked him what he wanted to do when he grew up. "I want to protect things that can't protect themselves," he said. His foster mother smiled. "Then you're in the right place." 5 years later, Lucas stood at the edge of a restricted dock in the Puget Sound, authorized by the Federal Marine Protection Program to observe the creatures as part of his junior research internship. He was 14 now, taller, stronger, but still carrying the memory of being a 9-year-old boy with nowhere to go except an abandoned aquarium. The water stirred. A familiar shape rose from the depths. The scarred one, older now, but still alive. It approached the dock and regarded Lucas with that same intelligent eye. Lucas knelt down and tapped his knuckles on the wood 3 times. The creature lifted a tentacle from the water and tapped back 3 times. "Exactly. I kept my promise," Lucas said quietly. "You're safe now." The creature's skin rippled with colors that Lucas had learned to partially interpret. Blues and greens meant calm, recognition. It remembered him, just as he would remember it for the rest of his life. The creature that had saved him, in the dark water of an abandoned aquarium, where a homeless boy had found refuge, and discovered he wasn't alone.